This time I'm going to call the meeting of the Charter Township Chesterfield Cannabis Committee meeting to order. It is 6 o'clock. Call the meeting to order. Roll call. Director Kirsten. Here. Trustee Vosberg.
Here.
Planning Commission Department Head, Mr. Palin.
Here.
And gentlemen from Giffels.
Here.
You're from Giffels Webster?
Yes, Eric Fazzini.
Okay. And we also have Attorney Siebert present. This time, not sure where Clerk Barry's at, so I'll go to the next consent agenda. All items under the consent agenda are considered routine by the board and will be enacted in one motion. There is no separate discussion of these items. If any of the items is required by a board member, it will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Public comments on the consent agenda items are permitted. Item A is approval of the minutes of the September 28, 2020 Cannabis Committee meeting and approval of the agenda. I need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Vosberg, supported by Director Kirsten. Ms. Siebert, do I need to do a roll call? Can I just do all in favor of approving the consent agenda as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nay? No nays. Okay, number 5, the regular agenda. Okay. I guess we'll wait. Kirk LeBerry's here now.
Doesn't matter. We got some changes to make to the agenda, so.
Pardon me?
We have some changes to make to the agenda, so.
We just approved it.
Okay,
We just approved the consent agenda.
no worries. Okay,
You want to do it then, or what?
we can go ahead and do that. Go ahead.
Okay, we're at the regular agenda now. Item 5 is A, briefing and legal updates by Attorney Seibert regarding the commercial cannabis in Michigan. Mr. Seibert?
All right. I was asked by Clerk Barry to just refresh the committee's review of the issues that I think you're back to consider again. And since we have 2 new members on the committee, with all of the other members being fully aware of what the issues are, I'm not going to make this a long overview, but let me just say, initially, let me tell you what we're not talking about. You've heard a lot, and maybe you've heard a lot in the township about the issue of primary caregiver grow operations in residential areas. That is not an issue that we're here to talk about tonight. We already have a zoning ordinance provision that regulates the grow operations of medical primary caregivers and patients under the Medical Marijuana Act, which was approved back in 2008. And we have ordinance provisions in place to deal with that. Director Palin and I are in the process now of suggesting some revisions to the Planning Commission to even tighten those restrictions further. So those have already been addressed by the Planning Commission and by the board, and those are not before this committee. This committee, I think, was initially assembled to address the issue of marijuana establishments under what was referred to as Proposition 1, which is the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, which I'll simply refer to as the recreational statute. That was approved by the voters in 2018, and under the terms of that statute, there are 6 different types of marijuana establishments that are allowed. And in the absence of any township regulations prohibiting them, they are allowed in this township so long as they obtain licensing through the state of Michigan. Section 6 of the Act does permit local units of government to adopt ordinances which prohibit some or all of the marijuana establishments. Chesterfield Township, along with approximately 1,400 plus or minus other municipalities in the state, has adopted an ordinance prohibiting all 6 of the establishments. So as of today, they are banned township-wide. The committee, when you last met in 2000, end of 2009, maybe early 20, the committee had made some recommendations to the township board. A presentation was given to the township board to see what direction the board wanted to take. When the board reviewed it, they decided that they were not prepared at that time to take any action. And then there were reappointments to the Cannabis Committee, and this is the first meeting that I'm aware of the new committee. So ultimately, this committee, I believe, is going to have to make a recommendation to the township board as to whether or not there is support, at least by the committee at the inception, for allowing some or all of these marijuana establishments in the township. If we get to the point where the board is willing to move in that direction, it's going to require two types of ordinance amendments. One would be a regulatory ordinance, which would allow the establishments. It would amend the ban that you have now, and it would permit the licensing of certain numbers of these 6 different establishments, and would provide rules for the permitting process, revocation, rules and regulations regarding the establishment operation themselves. The other would be a zoning ordinance amendment where the Planning Commission would have to hold a public hearing and determine which zoning districts in the township those marijuana establishments would be allowed. But both of those ultimately are going to require township board approval. One of the issues that we talked about at our last committee meeting was the potential prejudice of doing nothing. And the recreational marijuana statute provides that a individual or individuals can circulate a petition that, if signed by 5% of the voters in the last gubernatorial election, can place an issue on the ballot to determine whether or not there should be a limited number or a complete authorization for all 6 of the establishments, and let the voters decide that. There is some argument to be made that if you take no action and completely ban these establishments, that it encourages the referendum or the petition process and encourages people that are interested in operating these 6 types of facilities to get those signatures and place it on the ballot and take some of the issues away from the township board. That was a consideration that we talked about at the last committee meeting, and I think the board even discussed it as well. But as you stand today, they are banned in the township. They are not permitted anywhere, and so far as I know, you haven't received any petitions for referendum. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the existing board committee members or new committee members have.
Does any of the members have any questions at this time? Director Kirsten? Trustee Vosberg? Clerk Berry? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to apologize to my committee members for being late. I apologize. It seems my card may have decided not to want to get me here today, so I got to drive all the way here in 3rd gear. Took a little longer than anticipated. So I have a question regarding current litigation with regards to, for example, the city of Port Huron. That's kind of an interesting one, and I wanted to know if you could let us know if you know anything about. My understanding is that Port Huron did not want to do anything. There was a threat of a ballot initiative or referendum happening there. They rushed to get something through their city council, and then I understand it kind of, everything came tumbling down from there, and it's gotten pretty ugly in the courts. I just wanted to know if you knew anything about that situation. That's really all I know about it.
I can tell you that the Port Huron case has not made it to the Michigan Court of Appeals in any published decision, which means it's not binding on anybody other than the litigants. When the Michigan Court of Appeals hears cases that make it up that far, and everybody, and I'm painting this with a broad brush, but generally, when you get done with circuit court litigation, the party that feels aggrieved can go to the Court of Appeals as a matter of right. And that's true in 99% of the cases. When you go to the Court of Appeals, a panel of 3 judges will issue an opinion, a written opinion, and it will either be deemed a published or an unpublished decision. Now, to you, you may say, well, does that mean it gets put in the paper or published in a journal or whatever? And it's a legal term of art. All the decisions are published, and every lawyer will get copies of all decisions of the Michigan Court of Appeals. But those that are designated as published by the court have statewide impact, which means they impact every single municipality in this regard throughout the state, and they have precedential effect, and they must be followed by every subsequent Michigan Court of Appeals panel. That Port Huron case did not get that far, and therefore it is binding on no one other than the litigants. So, for example, if we handled a case for Chesterfield that made it to the Court of Appeals, no matter how the case ended up, and the panel issues a written decision, if it is an unpublished decision, it means that it is only binding on the other party in the township and no one else. And that's as far as the Port Huron Township case got. So it's binding on no one, and for our standpoint, has no impact whatsoever. There are no cases that have been decided as of this morning under the recreational statute that have been published by the Michigan Court of Appeals. So it's as blank as that screen up there as far as what judicial precedent is.
Anything else, Clerk Berry?
No, that's all, thank you.
Mr. Palin?
No questions.
Okay. Seeing next, I guess we'll go to item B on the regular agenda, which is an overview of commercial cannabis and zoning maps by the Township Planner and our representative from Giffels Webster.
Thank you. So last March, we created a series of maps to give you an idea of how standards that could be developed would look throughout the township. So the way to use these maps is there's two options for each broad use category. So we used agriculture, commercial, and industrial. So in any general ordinance or zoning ordinance that's ultimately considered, a portion of those standards would be location-based standards. So you'd have your permitting and your licensing standards, operational detailing standards related to the use, but a key set of standards is where you want to permit these, obviously. So how these maps work is if you start in the bottom right, so these are the sample standards that the map's based on, and they directly relate to the legend that's above there. So we have either a 500 or 1,000-foot setback from 5 types of sensitive uses, schools, parks, and other uses. And then the bottom two are additional setbacks that apply concerning residential zoning. So a 500-foot setback from residential zoning, and then a prohibition on being adjacent to residential zoning. So how that works with the legend is the dark green means those areas indicated on the map in dark green, that those are zoned agriculture, so A1, and those sites meet all of the standards that are in the bottom right of the map. The light green indicates sites that meet the standards depending on where the building is located. So all these setbacks or buffers are measured from the cannabis facility building to the property line of the regulated use, such as a school or park. And then the orange is again related to the standards. It's a site that's abutting residential zoning. And then the brown is within both the 500-foot or 1,000-foot buffer, and then also within 500 feet of residential. And then the dark gray is the site of the regulated use, so the school or the park. The maps don't vary a whole lot between the two. So the first map and the second map are the same information, just with the 500-foot buffer on the first and then the 1,000-foot on the second. So basically the dark green on each map is for that use type where these types of facilities could be permitted. So that's all I really have on the maps. If there's any questions about the maps or zoning process in general, I'd be glad to answer them.
Any questions, Director Kirsten?
None at this time.
Trustee Vosberg.
Thank you. Yes, I have just one question regarding the zoning agriculture maps. The 500 and the 1,000, those were just arbitrary distances, or does that somehow tie in with the proposal one?
I don't recall when they came from. Their sample distances. They could be different. They could be significantly less or more.
It's what you selected for this?
Yeah, so
discussion,
the
in prior
committee
discussion?
had decided on that before, and then I believe 500 is what's allowed in the act, I think, for the minimum. I might be wrong on that, but we currently have, as Mr. Siebert was referencing the caregivers, we currently have it in there as 1,000. There's a few other uses that we provide a buffer, and we've typically been at 1,000 for those other ones, so that's
Okay.
why we wanted to show the alternatives.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Clerk Berry?
My only question is that, and this is somewhat of a restating of this, is that for our liquor establishments, the current buffer for that is 1,000 feet, is that correct?
I think that's right.
So this would be consistent, my question is, would this use be consistent with other similar uses such as alcohol establishments?
I could look that up for you definitively. I don't deal with the liquor on a day-to-day, so I don't know off the top of my head, but I can pull it up here quickly.
And then I just had one other question as well, if
Go ahead, ma'am.
my other question was, when Rod had presented this to us, he had indicated that, and I just want to restate this and see if I'm accurate, or if I'm not, please correct me, but Rod had stated that some of the criteria that he used in the methodology in coming up with these maps is there was in fact some methodology regarding similarly situated communities, other examples of kind of, I'll say best practices, but other things that were consistent with these types of uses when these types of zones are established. For example, the types of facilities that the buffer would keep these things distanced from. I think we added senior communities. It's pretty typical, if I'm understanding, it's usually churches and schools and substance abuse rehab facilities, that sort of thing. I think we added senior living as well. But Rod indicated, I thought at the time, that he did have a methodology that he used that included those types of criteria.
So these standards are very similar to other communities that have regulated cannabis facilities through zoning. These are almost identical to the city of New Baltimore, with the exception of the distances. Those are different, but the uses that are intended to be buffered are the same. And then that tail end additional buffers for residential zoning, that's also something you could tweak. They tweaked it through their process, whether or not that creates too much of a hurdle, or depending on the community, if there's a concern adjacent to residential properties. So that's something you could consider as tweaking the residential related standards.
Thank you, that completes my questions, thanks.
I really don't have any questions, since I'm the representative from the Planning Commission. Trustee Vosberg's here from ZBA. Thank you, Mr. Siebert. Myself, I'm fairly well versed in this from my profession. Director Kirsten I know's up. I think Trustee Vosberg, you've been fairly much understand what's going on. And Clerk Berry, I know you've been on this committee since its inception with the board. I don't have anything else. I guess we can possibly move on to the next item, which is the addendum. There wasn't any and approved in that. So next is public comments. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to speak, please come up to the podium, state your name and address, and you can address the committee at this time. Welcome, Mr. Aiello. Could you hit the button in front of you, sir, so it turns red, and then say it in the mic when it's live? Thank you, sir.
Chris Aiello, 49432 Compass Point, Chesterfield. So tonight's meeting is to determine if this committee will give a recommendation back to the Board of Trustees to vote on, or clarify what the purpose of the meeting tonight is.
Okay, to the best of my recollection, unless Clerk Berry has something else, it's just on the agenda items that were presented, and there is no recommendation on the agenda for anything to be recommended further at this point. Mr. Siebert, is there anything else that I should be aware of since I'm just new to this and filling? Sir?
No, this is your first committee meeting back after the board has essentially reconstituted the committee. What you do at the committee level is your decision entirely. I mean, I'm here to provide you with whatever legal guidance I can, but how you handle it and what recommendations you make is entirely up to the committee.
Thank you, sir.
So the committee tonight has the ability to recommend something to the Board of Trustees. Am I correct, Mr. Siebert?
Well, it's our first meeting here with the five of us, excuse me, so I don't think there's gonna be any recommendation tonight because there's nothing on the agenda. And to my recollection, from what I see and on the advice of council, I'm not making any recommendation at this time until we meet again, unless someone, Director Kirsten, Trustee Vosberg, or Mr. Palin, or Clerk Berry has something they wanna recommend at this point.
Well, to be clear, I'm not making any recommendation that you do anything, one way or the other. If you feel comfortable and you're all in to make a recommendation to the board that they lighten up the ordinance ban that you have, more power to you. But that's your decision to make. You have the legal right to make, I mean, nothing you do is binding on anybody. All you're doing is making a recommendation to the township board based upon input that this committee has received for over the last year and a half. If you're comfortable to make a recommendation, you can certainly do that. If you're not, you're not compelled to do it. That decision is entirely up to the committee.
So we've met now for a year and a half. So at this point, everybody here has been apprised of almost every aspect of this law. We have zoning maps. We've done this for a year and a half, and this is typical throughout the state how it goes to some degree. But everybody here tonight on this committee has been involved, and I've seen each and every one of you vote certain ways in the past when it got even up to the supervisor level. And so it doesn't make any sense to me, business sense or political sense at this point from what I see here tonight, to pass on this. Let's make a recommendation that you're going to sit on that board up there anyways, and you're going to be able to have a vote one way or the other, Mr. DeMuynck or Cindy or Ms. Vosberg, on how this is going to pan out. Why would you allow us to dangle this in this committee for another month when this has been the typical response from the neighborhood for a year and a half? How could we hide from this? This is now a year and a half later, and these chairs have been empty this long. There's been more than one or two meetings with advocates. There's never been a outspoken group, special interest group, or just citizens in general that came out here and said, not in my backyard. It's just not here. This is a year and a half later. Why in the world would we table this? Imagine you in your private company trying to do business in Chesterfield, where the prize this year, did you see how much the city of Ann Arbor got? $462,000 this year. That's just the beginning. The county also received money. So if Chesterfield, if you believe in your heart that Chesterfield has enough money and that we, as myself, as a citizen of this township, enjoy paying more taxes, or we just keep filling, we have no problem doing it, then I guess just keep stringing this along. But Ann Arbor, a progressive city, looking forward in life, is reap the benefit of this. So every retail store that they approved received $30,000. You probably all have seen that already. So at the beginning of this, everybody was like, it's a facade. Oh, Lansing's never going to give us money. They always keep it themselves. Well, it didn't happen, and it's rolling out, and sales are almost predicted to be at $5 billion in 2 or 3 years. There was just an article here in Michigan. So the estimated numbers that I've seen next year are going to be closer to $50,000 per retail store, but that's once you phase 2 completed and open, that's how they count it. So we keep kicking this can down the road. I don't know what other businesses ever come into our township, ours. I've been here for 20-some years, and said, we're going to pay you to operate here. We're going to give you $50,000 a year into your general fund to maybe make another paddle park by your house, Mr. DeMuynck, or put the money back into Brandenburg Park because we got a shared relationship with the state of Michigan. How can we do that as a community? Sit here and keep dragging this along when all of this money is out here. How can we do this? Seriously, we all live in Chesterfield. Doesn't the person to the right and to the left of you and across the street always complain about taxes, whether it's on a national level or on a local level? Don't we have a duty to like try to reduce this or build our general fund up? So if we do, and I think the answer is yes, there's no reason here tonight not to just recommend something to the board and let the board handle it. The three of you sit on the board, so let's be honest with each other. Let's look in the mirror right now and say, the three of you sit on the board right now. Let's just get this over with. If you're for or against it, whatever, get it out of this committee. Don't beat it to death. Remember the little bill that we used to have when we were kids, Mr. Bill, the little bill that they used to have a cartoon about, and they killed the little Bill as he walked up the steps of D.C.? Don't do that here. Get this out of this committee here. We've heard nothing. We've done nothing tonight. We've wasted all this time because there's nothing left to do. We've done it for a year and a half, and you've heard from endless groups of experts and professionals all about this. It's not a threat to the community, it's a business. We've heard it all, you've heard it all, we know it all. So let's get it out of the arena of politics and put it back on the arena of business, where us, the people of Chesterfield Township, actually care that if you bring in some dollars that'll reduce something here or add something to the community. We've seen the maps, we've seen the regulatory ordinance, and it's a clever idea you have here. These lawsuits, I'll just comment on Port Huron. So I heard Ms. Berry answer that. So my company was fortunate. We won a license in Port Huron, and we're stuck in the middle of a lawsuit. Why? Because the council kind of took too long to get around to getting the ordinance enacted. The petition was filed. It got caught up in the Court of Appeals on some other issues on election law, and it came out. And the lawsuits all have to do with Section 9 of MRTMA, and that is just one narrow issue, how you create your competitive scoring criteria. And that's what it's all about. And it doesn't have to do with a big bad marijuana leaf. It had to do with how the cities are interpreting Section 9 in the state law. Bottom line, yeah. And I don't mean to offend anyone. I guess it's just, if you were here in my shoes, and this is a year and a half, and you live here, and you know as much as you know, there's no reason to postpone this anymore. Let's get it up there, let's get a vote, and let's find out where everybody stands. And then, well, we won't be in this situation.
Thank you, Mr. Aiello.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone else from the public want to speak? Okay, seeing anyone else? Clerk Berry, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Trustee DeMuynck. I appreciate that. Just wanted to make a couple of comments because myself, along with Director Palin, Director Kirsten, have served on this committee since its inception, as was pointed out. But our two new members, as astute as they are and as bright as they are, have really not as much exposure to this in this capacity as we have. They haven't seen a lot of what we've seen. I'm guessing perhaps the maps are the first maybe they've even seen of them. So to ask, I think it would be unreasonable to ask this committee in its new form to make any decisions tonight with regards to how we want to proceed. However, that being said, I have been studying this issue myself for well over close to 3 years, just over 3 years. I'm very, very well versed in it myself. I've seen all of the things that have gone wrong in other communities and have in fact, crafted some of my own thoughts about how to proceed with this in the event that we are faced with a situation where we will be moving forward with this. So I do plan, just so that everyone is aware, I do plan to bring to this committee a regulatory ordinance at our next meeting for their consideration and review, for them to parse out, find out what they like about it, what they don't like about it, may not like anything about it. And then we'll know that through some meaningful discussion, but at least they will have some time to absorb at least the information they've been given tonight, as well as some of the other information that's been presented over the past year and a half. So the purpose of the meeting tonight, when I called the meeting, the purpose was, first off, to get this board together, or this committee together for the first time in its new form, and to get the new members kind of on the front page here and get them up to speed with what we had done by getting briefings from legal and from planning, which are the two pieces, as you know. Those, as Attorney Siebert pointed out, there's the regulatory piece, which is the legal piece, and then there's the zoning piece. By having presentations by both of those professional service consultants of ours, that's allowed our new members the opportunity to ask questions and to review the information that they have presented. So that was the purpose here tonight. I would anticipate that our next meeting will include a regulatory ordinance for their review again. Would I expect a recommendation? Perhaps not. Perhaps we will. But they will at least have some ample time to absorb all the information. It's a lot. It took me the better part of a couple of years to really get my head around it and to have a very clear sense of what needs to happen. And I do have a very clear opinion on what should happen with this particular issue. So, but my fellow board members and committee members here have not been afforded that opportunity yet. So I was hoping to start the process of giving them all of that information, and that was the purpose for here tonight. I do plan to bring a regulatory ordinance for them to look at for their review at our next meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Clerk Berry. Seeing there was no other public comments, Clerk Berry made a comment. Director Kirsten, do you have anything else you'd like to add, sir?
Not at this time.
Trustee Vosberg?
Thank you.
Mr. Palin?
Yeah, I just wanted to, just for, to be open with the committee and, to the public, in my capacity as the Township Planning Director, I would be the one charged with, the regulating and enforcement of any ordinances that would come out of this body. So I want to make it known that if there is a recommendation on policy to the Township Board, I think it would be appropriate for me to abstain from that. Because in the case that I give an opinion that's different than what's ultimately decided, I think it's, pretty much assume there's going to be a bias there. So when it comes to ordinances, zoning, land use consideration, where, my expertise would come in, I think my recommendations would be well served in that capacity, but just so everyone's aware, that's the approach I plan to take to it.
Okay, I understand that. Ms. Siebert, is that allowable, sir?
Well, Mr. Palin's not an elected official, so he's not required to vote on anything. And if he feels conflicted or he feels that it's going to put him in a position where there's an appearance of a conflict, it's his decision to make.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to get clarification from legal on that. All right, I don't have any other questions, so at this time, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Motion by Director Kirsten,
Second.
second by Clerk Berry to adjourn at 6:35. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.